In the overnight hours on the streets of Manhattan, unsuspecting men out for a night in the city become sudden targets with deadly consequences.
They actually were outside the club waiting for their ma, who was drunk and on their own.
Caught up as prey by a brazen group on the hunt.
Targeting them in front of were predominantly known to be gay bars.
Drugging their victims, gaining access to their phones.
I think the intention was to use the concoction of narcotics that they made with the intention of incapacitating these people so they can steal their property.
Robbing them of their money, stealing their credit cards, and leaving some of their victims for dead.
They killed my son, who contributed so much to me, so much to his family.
Devastating families left searching for answers.
We were all just stunned, like, couldn't believe it, that he was dead because somebody wanted to take his money.
And a community warning that it could happen again.
I think there are a lot of other victims.
This is how his family remembers Julio Ramirez, a fun-loving 25-year-old social worker with his whole life ahead of him.
My brother Julio, he was very, he was smart, he was giving, kind.
Carlos Ramirez says his family adored his younger brother, saying he was the kind of person who looked after his family and friends, always lifting their spirits.
I couldn't have asked for a better brother.
They say a day wouldn't pass where someone in the family talked to Julio. So after spending a night out at a club in Hell's Kitchen, his brother thought maybe his brother spent the day sleeping after being out late.
We went to bed and I expected to see a text from him the next morning.
But the next morning, Carlos learned his little brother's friends were also looking for Julio.
They called my mom's house phone and, you know, they were asking her if she heard from him, and she, you know, that's when she got worried.
You're watching surveillance video of Julio outside the Ritz Bar and Lounge. You can see as Julio makes his way to the entrance of the club, he's approached by a group of men.
Julio had left the club with 3 men, and there was a video of him leaving the club with the 3 men.
New York journalist Phil O'Brien says the men Julio is speaking with were looking for someone like Julio, someone who was friendly and appeared intoxicated.
The men never entered the club. That wasn't their MO most of the time.
New York police homicide detective Randy Rose says the group grabbed a taxi when 3 men suddenly jump out of the taxi, leaving Julio behind.
A uniformed cop in the 9th precinct gets flagged down by a taxi cab driver on Stanton Street, who pulls around, pulls over, the cops approach, and they see a unconscious 20 to 30-year-old male in the backseat of the car.
True Crime News has obtained this police body cam footage of when the officers respond. An officer climbs into the taxi and lays him down on the back seat and performs CPR. Julio is then transported to the hospital, where he is later pronounced dead, and Julio's parents are contacted.
My dad just came out and said it, and he said, you know, Julio is dead. And I don't even remember what happened after that. It was just all a blur.
The cause of death was a drug overdose, fentanyl with other drugs found in his system. But that didn't sit right with Carlos, saying it was completely out of character for Julio. So he managed to get into Julio's computer and became alarmed when he says he saw thousands of dollars of transactions in the time immediately after he died.
That's when I figured that something really bad happened. I mean, it was bad enough that he died, but, you know, somebody harmed him. He didn't just, it wasn't an accident.
Nearly $20,000 had been taken from Julio's accounts, his family worrying that this would be dismissed by police as an accidental overdose.
We were contacted by a family member who basically said to us, look, there's this death. Our friend was found in the back of a cab.
Phil O'Brien started following the story as there had been a recent string of unrelated robberies in the gay community.
This was a case that wasn't getting any profile. And so we acted.
The journalist became frustrated with local city police officials and their response to recent crimes.
There's somebody dead and people are saying, oh, be safe for your drinks. And it seemed to be diverting blame to, oh, you should be safe with drugs, be careful what drugs you get. And it was just like, this isn't about the individual.
Then the unthinkable. Just 6 weeks later, it would happen again. Sitting in her living room with photos of her son, John Umberger, always by her side, Linda Clary says her life has been forever changed.
John, it
What?
is time to go to bed.
Mom!
Do I need to take your phone away from you? It is time
I'm
to stop.
researching. I am an influencer. I am researching. I am on TikTok.
Stop.
Please just let me live my life.
Remembering the funny moment, a loving life with someone she called her best friend.
John always enjoyed making the impossible happen, and that was a trait he kind of had even as a child.
Growing up, Linda says she could tell that John was destined for success, a precocious boy who grew up to be an intelligent, social, and ambitious young man. John, now 32 years old, working as a political consultant in Washington, D.C.
He still was based in D.C., but he was going to New York usually once a week. And this trip, this was the first time he was going to stay in the townhouse. And he had meetings on Thursday and Friday related to work.
Linda says John wanted to spend a few days in New York City before his meetings, so he arrived on the weekend, unpacked at the company-owned townhouse, and decided to go out.
Sunday, I believe I called him and like, hey, just checking in. And it was very strange because it would say red text. John had the red text notifications on his phone, so if you sent him a text, and it would say red text. So I didn't really worry about anything at that time.
But John would never respond, and his friends hadn't heard from him either.
Another close friend of his reached out to my youngest son, Nathan, to say, I'm really concerned. John isn't responding to me. And then more friends started reaching out to me as well.
This is the last time anyone had seen or heard from John. He let some of his friends know he was at the Q Bar in Hell's Kitchen. Captured on surveillance cameras at around 3 a.m., you can see him here, standing outside the club. It was around that time that he was in touch with some friends through a group chat.
Everybody kind of confirmed that was the last time anyone had heard from John, was that video around 2:30 or 3 a.m. on Saturday morning.
At 3:22 a.m., he appears to be waiting for an Uber, but just behind him, two men are lurking, the same men who Julio Ramirez was talking to before he was found unresponsive in a taxi.
He encounters Jayqwan Hamilton and Robert DeMaio as he's leaving for the night. He ends up going with them. They get into what turns out to be a car rented, Dodge Durango that they rented. They drive around for an hour or so. They end up back at John's townhouse.
He heads inside the townhouse with Jayqwan Hamilton and Robert DeMaio. John lays down on the bed. He would never get back up. Then, in one of the most brazen and unthinkable acts, as John is unconscious on the bed, Robert DeMaio takes a selfie beside him, and the men leave the townhouse. About 30 minutes later, John's boss went to the townhouse 2 days later after not hearing from him.
John's boss did call me and share that they had found John's body and that it was like he was sitting on the bed and he was tying a shoe and he just fell backwards. He said there was no foul play involved. Those are the most devastating, life-altering words that you can ever hear, that your child is dead.
Nothing made any sense to Linda. The grieving mom needed to understand what happened that night.
I kept saying, well, where is the phone? Where's the wallet?
His wallet and phone were taken. Then strange transactions were appearing on his credit cards.
Meanwhile, a friend of John's reached out to one of my sisters and shared the story that he had heard about Julio Ramirez. And the two things sounded very similar with the outcome, that Julio was robbed and his body was left for dead in the back of a taxi cab.
The toxicology report on John was also similar to Julio's. They were both drugged with a similar mixture, including fentanyl. That's when homicide detective Randy Rose took over the case.
Once we started getting the financial records back, we were able to link up using phone numbers and various financial transactions, and we were able to see that the same people that were involved in John Umberger's case in the 19th precinct were also involved in the death of Julio Ramirez.
Detective Rose started putting the pieces together. They were able to get video from the stores where the transactions occurred, like these, where the men who were with Julio and John are seen shopping. Police found transactions for food, shoes, and expensive clothing.
When you see how callous these people were and spending money on things that John didn't even spend money on, that Julio didn't spend money on, that the other living victims didn't spend money on, it's sickening. And they took Julio Ramirez and they traded his life for an $1,800 Prada hat.
2 young lives tragically cut far too short, leaving heartbroken families asking if the people they loved died over senseless greed.
They would transfer like 5,000 here, then a couple hours later another 3, and just so on.
Young men who went out to clubs in the Manhattan neighborhood of Hell's Kitchen.
There's no way, what I already knew in my heart, there was no way this was a suicide. There was no way this was an intentional drug overdose or anything like that.
And friends searching for answers, reaching out to anyone who would listen, including a New York City journalist sounding the alarm.
We were fed up with just getting this. And that was the official line, that as far as they were concerned, the man had been found overdosed with drugs.
New York journalist Phil O'Brien wanted more urgency from local officials, but behind the scenes, investigators were connecting the dots.
The medical examiner ruled both homicides based upon the fact that had John and Julio not encountered these people on those nights, they'd likely still be alive today.
And with the case now in the hands of a homicide detective, a pattern started to emerge when looking at John Umberger's bank records.
He had American Express transactions that were sent to a J. Hamilton at a specific phone number. And when I started playing around with that phone number in our NYPD system, that phone number connected to Jayqwan Hamilton in the Julio Ramirez case as well.
From there, a trove of surveillance footage, text messages, and GPS data tracked several suspects, but rental car records from this red SUV pointed back to Robert DeMaio, who was last seen with John Umberger. That would turn up key evidence that shocked even this veteran detective.
Ultimately, a search warrant that was conducted on Robert DeMaio's cell phone, which uncovered video that DeMaio himself took inside the townhouse with John unconscious on the bed, and they pretty much documented their own crime scene.
Jayqwan Hamilton, Robert DeMaio, and their friend Jacob Barroso were all charged with second-degree murder, conspiracy, robbery, and identity theft. 2 others were arrested for being part of the ring, Linda Clary crediting Detective Randy Rose and his team.
Thank the Lord that providentially he took the call and took the case, because he is the greatest homicide detective, and I truly believe that without him, these people would not have been caught.
A New York jury found the defendants guilty on all counts. They faced 25 years to life when sentenced later this year. 2 others pled guilty to another crime.
It's the disregard for human life. That's that kind of person that shouldn't be out in the world. A person who just wouldn't even think twice to end someone's life to get what they want.
The verdict giving the families of the victims a sense of justice.
I actually was in shock. I couldn't believe that we finally got to this point. And it was a sense of just enormous gratitude to God that we had gotten to this point.
And questions about how many others had fallen victim to the depraved actions of the callous criminals.
You think about the amount of people that these guys had contact with or did the same thing to and lived to tell about the story.